So, um, one of the things that I also know to be a fact about writing is that you write about what you know. And I know that, I'm a small town guy, farm guy, and always have been. So it's easy for me to write stories about the small towns, right? And farm life. When I have to step outside that box and come up with other things to make, to draw the thing together and to make the story work, then it becomes a lot of work. It's really, you really have to put a lot of effort and time and research into that. So this one here, I'm just gonna have a few notes here I wanted to touch on. So actually, I'll just set the scene for the little excerpt that I planned on reading from this. And again, getting back to the small town, back in the I don't know how late this phenomenon ended, but every small town had a cop, the town cop, and so I actually put that into a couple of different places in the story. But in this book, so you've got Alfred, who his nickname is Chug, and he's a great big Norwegian, great big guy. He's 6'5", and he's a huge man, but he's a big gentle giant. And his cousin Orville, he's a bit of a rogue, a little bit of an imp. So he's the troublemaker of the two. So they're making their way across Saskatchewan on their bicycles, and lots of monotony, lots of long stretches of road, of open road. So they come to this little town called Portage, and the town's having their local fair with a dance that night. So they decide, well, let's stick around. We'll go to the dance tonight. So they go to the dance, and Orville has snuck along a bottle of whiskey. So he's got this Mickey of whiskey in his pocket, and every once in a while he slips out of the dance and has a little nip. And Chug doesn't like this very much, but he's in there dancing with all the old ladies, and like a small town dance goes, eh? And but Orville, he's picking the wallflowers, picking off the wallflowers. Of course, he's picking off the prettiest one all the time. And so the local boys are starting to get pretty upset about this. So I'll start into the reading here. Chug began to notice young men gathered, putting their heads together, nudging each other with elbows and nodding meaningfully. Judging by their glares, he knew that something was brewing. He noticed a pair of them break off and slip outside, and then another disappeared. When the orchestra took a break, Orville headed outside for another nip. Suspicious, Chug waited a few moments and then followed, and what he found was not good. Orville stood in the middle of a circle of angry young men, and his mouth was in full gear. "So what can I do for you buckaroos tonight?" he taunted the boys, slurring more than a little. The men remained silent, merely tightening the circle. Then one of the young fellows reached out and sucker punched Orville, who reacted by rushing in that direction. An anonymous foot appeared, locking with Orville's and sending him tumbling to the ground. The men swarmed him, pushing and struggling, and the swarm quickly became a mishmash of arms, legs, grunting, and cursing. Orville's voice rose above the din, still taunting, even though none of them was visible. Chug was going to have none of this ganging up business. He let out a bellow that turned everyone's heads, freezing them in their action. He waded into the Donnybrook with reckless abandon. Bodies flew like rag dolls as he methodically went about his business, and when his work was done, he and Orville stood alone. Now the angry, albeit slightly bruised mob of locals surrounded both of them. There was a moment of silence as they all scowled. "So," one of the gangsters said, "you're a big bitch." His eyes shot fire at Chug, and even as he leaned over and spat tobacco juice in a thin, violent stream, the juice lifted a tiny puff of dust from the dry dirt in the alley. It rose to knee height and then hung in the still air. "You think you can take us all?" The others grunted in agreement and nodded their heads, emboldened by the cockiness and insolence of their leader. Chug and Orville braced for another assault, but before the attack could begin, a uniformed figure stepped out of the shadows. "So, Soup Can, what have we got here?" the officer said. "You and your boys doing a little ganging up on this Saturday night?" The ringleader, who now had a name, slowly turned to face the officer. The disdainful look on his face was unmistakable despite the dim light. "And just what in hell business is it of yours, Clancy?" Soup Can scoffed. "Well, it's my job to uphold the law in this little slice of heaven we call Portage, Soup Can, and beating up a couple of visitors, though it might surprise you, is definitely against the law." "It ain't like you's a real cop anyway," Soup Can spat back at him, the large plug of tobacco in his cheek making him slur his S's. "Everybody knows you got the town copper job just because your brother-in-law's the mayor. Now why don't you do yourself a favor and get the hell out of here before me and the boys decide to take you down first?" Soup Can let loose a harsh, crackling laugh. "Unless, that is, you think you can pinch the lot of us at once." He took a few quick steps toward the police officer. "Scram!" he yelled, and any hope Chug and Orville may have had at a peaceful resolution disappeared into the night along with Clancy, the town cop. The darkness quickly swallowed up his hastily retreating uniform. It seemed the small-town copper had decided his own hide, not to mention his job, was more important than any morals he may have held. Now they were back to the standoff. Chug tried desperately to think of a way out. He knew that Orville would be no help in the thinking department, less help in the fight department, and in his semi-inebriated state, probably even less in the flight department. The gang closed in, circling their victims and throwing a few punches. Suddenly out of the darkness rolled a big black sedan. It sailed in so quietly that no one, not the brawlers, not the defenders, not the dozen spectators who had amassed around the back stoop of the hall, heard its approach. The sedan came so close to the battle that it nearly struck several members of Soup Can's gang. The engine and lights had been extinguished for stealth, and the only sound to be heard besides that of gravel crunching under rubber tires was the squeal of brakes as the car skidded to a halt. As many as 8 young men immediately piled out of the doors. "How's Soup Can and his maggots doing tonight?" a young man hollered from inside the sedan. Pushing through his boys and sizing up the situation, he said, "Keeping the odds in your favor like always, I see." "Don't need no odds to take down a bucket of scum from Pissfield like you, Adams. What's the matter? You run out of little girls and old codgers to beat up in that shithole you call a town? Come looking for a real fight, did you?" "Well, let's see about that," Adams shouted, and without wasting another word, he gleefully led his warriors into battle. Chug instantly recognized the situation for what it was, a long-standing feud between rival towns that probably went back years, if not generations. He would dearly have loved to stick around to see how things turned out. However, the pragmatist in him said that Providence had provided one and perhaps only one chance to escape. Grabbing Orville by the collar and physically dragging him along, he slowly backed out of the light cast by the street lamp, whispering loudly, "Let's get the hell out of here." They turned tail and ran, stumbling over things unseen in back alleys and vacant lots. Orville was beginning to grasp the seriousness of the situation and had sobered up enough that he was not just dead weight anymore. Shouts could be heard, but as to whether their attackers were in pursuit, they were not about to turn around to find out. By a sheer stroke of luck, the boys had stowed their gear on the west side of town. After hunkering down in some bushes for a while to make sure they hadn't been followed, they snuck through a ditch, donned their packs, and jumped on their bikes. Several times they took to the ditch at the approach of a vehicle, not willing to take the chance it might be their pursuers. Orville tipped over a couple of times, and Chug had to admonish him for singing loudly as they made their escape. They rode by the light of the moon, and by daybreak they were far from Portage. Later that morning, a smile lit up Chug's face as a tiny bit of the night's adventure became clearer. The town they were passing by had the unlikely name of Peacefield. Now, who thinks that could never have happened in a small town? How are you doing, Trudy? So, any comments or questions?
Very cool. Can't wait to read the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that part, there's quite a few different, obviously quite a few excerpts that a person can read, but that one, there's a long, slow development as they make their way through Saskatchewan, as it would be, right? Forever to get from Govan to Calgary, and then things really heat up there. So that's all I have.